couple set off on their anniversary hunting trip in the Michigan wilderness, but they never returned, vanishing without a trace into the vast forest. 2 years later, their dog, severely injured and emaciated, appeared on the porch, carrying with it a secret that would unravel a chilling chain of events and reveal a nightmare no one could have imagined. Elizabeth Spence, her joints aching with age, bent down slowly, pulling yet another weed from around her tomato plants. At 72, the garden work was becoming harder each year, but she was determined not to let the weeds take over, not after all the effort she'd put into her patch of earth over the decades. Just a few more, she muttered to herself, eyeing the row of vegetables that still needed attention. But the beeping of the timer from the kitchen reminded her of the pot roast simmering on the stove. With a grunt, she pushed herself up, a hand resting against her lower back. The walk to the house felt longer than it used to, each step sending a twinge through her knees. It had been 2 years since her son Dean and his wife Jocelyn had gone hunting and never come back. Elizabeth tried to push the thought of them out of her mind, focusing instead on the carrots she needed to add to the roast. As she reached for the screen door, something moved on the porch, catching her eye. Expecting a raccoon or a stray cat, she turned, but what she saw made her stop dead in her tracks. There, lying on the old wooden boards, was a dog. But not just any dog. Even through his filthy, matted fur and emaciated body, Elizabeth recognized him instantly. Rufus, Dean's Irish wolfhound. Her heart began to race painfully as she stumbled back, her hand flying to her chest. "No," she whispered, blinking hard. This couldn't be happening. Rufus lifted his head weakly at the sound of her voice. His front leg was wrapped in a makeshift, filthy bandage, and his ribs were clearly visible beneath his coat. There was a raw, infected wound on his forehead, but it was his eyes, those familiar, gentle brown eyes that unmistakably belonged to Rufus. Elizabeth's legs nearly gave out beneath her as she gripped the porch railing for support. 2 years. The dog had been missing for 2 years, just like Dean and Jocelyn. The search parties had found nothing. No bodies, no gear, no sign of them or Rufus in the vast Michigan woods. With shaking hands, she fumbled for her phone, nearly dropping it twice before finally dialing 911. 911, what's your emergency? This is Elizabeth Spence, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I need officers at my house immediately. The dog, my son's dog, just showed up. My son, who's been missing for 2 years. Ma'am, can you repeat that? Dean Spence's dog, she said more firmly, though her voice still shook. My son is DEA agent Dean Spence. He went missing 2 years ago with his wife Jocelyn while hunting. Their dog just appeared on my porch. He's badly injured. Please send someone now. Units are on their way, Mrs. Spence. Are you safe? Is anyone else there? Just me and the dog. He can barely move. Oh God, what does this mean? Where's my son? Elizabeth sank down onto the porch steps, keeping her eyes on Rufus. The dog's tail gave a weak thump, as if he recognized her too. She wanted to go to him, to comfort him, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. All she could do was stare, whispering, "Where's Dean, boy? Where's my son?" The sound of sirens grew louder, and within minutes, 2 patrol cars pulled into the driveway. Officers Morrison and Bradley. Elizabeth recognized them both. They had been part of the initial search when Dean disappeared. Mrs. Spence, Officer Morrison said gently, his eyes widening when he saw the dog. Jesus, is that really? It's Rufus, Elizabeth confirmed, tears streaming down her face. Now he's Dean's dog. Officer Bradley was already on his radio, calling for additional units and a veterinarian. Morrison knelt beside the dog, careful not to startle him. "Hey there, boy. You've had a rough time, haven't you?" he said softly. Looking up at Elizabeth, he added, "We need to get him medical attention immediately, and we'll need to take you to the station. The detectives will want to speak with you right away." "But what about searching? If Rufus is alive, maybe Dean will handle everything, Morrison reassured her. Let's focus on getting you and the dog somewhere safe first. More vehicles arrived, an animal control van with a veterinarian, 2 more patrol cars, and an unmarked detective's vehicle. Elizabeth watched, dazed, as the vet, a young woman with gentle hands, carefully examined Rufus. Severe malnutrition, dehydration, she murmured. This wound on his head is infected. The leg, someone tried to bandage it, but it's been a while. We need to get him to the clinic immediately. They carefully loaded Rufus onto a stretcher, the dog whimpering softly, too weak to resist. Elizabeth, still in a daze, found herself in the back of Officer Morrison's patrol car, heading to the station. Her mind raced with questions. How had Rufus survived 2 years in the wilderness? Who had helped him? And, most pressing of all, what had happened to her son, Dean, and his wife, Jocelyn? The familiar building of the police station loomed ahead, but it felt surreal, as if she were watching someone else's life unfold. Officers held doors open for her, guiding her to a comfortable interview room. It wasn't the cold, sterile interrogation rooms she'd seen on TV, but a softer space with padded chairs and a coffee maker in the corner. Mrs. Spence, I'm Detective Walsh, a woman in her 40s introduced herself, offering a warm smile. I know this must be overwhelming. Can I get you some water or coffee? Where's the dog? Elizabeth asked, her voice tense with worry. Dr. Hernandez from the emergency veterinary clinic is with him now, Walsh replied. She'll update us as soon as she can. Right now, I need you to tell me exactly what happened. More officers began to file in, detectives from Dean's DEA department and uniformed officers who knew him. The small room filled with concerned faces. Elizabeth recounted the events of finding Rufus, her voice growing steadier with each word. The detectives took notes, asking careful questions. When had she last seen the dog? What was his condition? Had she noticed anything unusual around her property recently? That bandage on his leg, Detective Walsh said thoughtfully. That's not something a dog could do to himself. Someone helped him. Someone knows something, Elizabeth said urgently, the realization hitting her hard. Someone must know what happened. We're already mobilizing search teams, another detective assured her. We'll start from your property and work outward, follow any trail the dog might have left. At that moment, Dr. Hernandez entered, still in her scrubs. He's stable, she announced, and Elizabeth sighed in relief. He's sedated for now while we treat his wounds and run some tests. He's been through hell, sorry for the language, but he's a fighter. Someone definitely provided medical care at some point, though not recently. That bandage is at least a few weeks old. When can I see him? Elizabeth asked, her heart aching. Let's give him a few hours to rest, Dr. Hernandez said gently. I'll bring him to you as soon as he's ready. The vet paused. Mrs. Spence, that's one tough dog. Whatever happened out there, he fought to make it back. Elizabeth nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Rufus had made it back, but where was her son? The interview room had grown warm with so many people packed inside. Elizabeth sat at the center of it all, fielding questions from the growing group of officers and detectives. Word had spread quickly through the department. Dean Spence's dog had returned after 2 years. Mrs. Spence, think carefully, Detective Walsh pressed gently. In the days before Dean and Jocelyn went hunting, did he mention anything unusual? Any concerns about his work? Threats he might have received? Elizabeth shook her head slowly. Nothing. He was excited about the trip. They'd been planning it for months, his anniversary hunting trip. He said the woods up north were perfect this time of year for deer. The door opened and 3 more officers entered, including Lieutenant Marcus Hayes from the DEA. Elizabeth recognized him from department functions she'd attended with Dean. Elizabeth, Hayes said, his face grave. I'm sorry you're going through this. We're going to do everything we can to find answers. He turned to the others. I've got our tech team pulling all of Dean's case files from the 2 months before he disappeared. If someone targeted him, there might be a connection. Another officer, younger with sharp blue eyes and sandy hair, stepped forward. Mrs. Spence, I'm Officer Dmitry Volkov. I worked a few joint operations with Dean. He's a good man. The conversation continued, theories flying back and forth. Elizabeth's head began to pound. She had been at the station for over 3 hours now, and the adrenaline that had carried her through the initial shock was beginning to wear off. Her arthritis flared painfully, her joints stiffening from sitting so long. I think Mrs. Spence has had enough for now, Officer Volkov said, noticing her discomfort. Perhaps someone should take her home. She needs rest, and we need to coordinate the search teams anyway. Detective Walsh nodded. He's right. Elizabeth, we'll continue working here. Is there someone we can call to stay with you? My other son, Neil, but he's at work in Detroit, Elizabeth replied. It'll take him a few hours to get here. I can drive you home, Officer Volkov offered, seeing her weariness. Make sure you're settled safely. This has been a tremendous shock. Elizabeth accepted gratefully. Her own car was still at home, and she wasn't sure she could manage the drive with her hands shaking. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Hernandez called with an update. Rufus is stable but still sedated, she said. I want to monitor him for a few more hours. Make sure there are no complications from the treatment. Would it be all right if I brought him to your home this evening? I'd like to check his response when he wakes up fully, see how he does in familiar surroundings. Yes, please, Elizabeth said immediately. He should be home. The drive back to her house felt surreal. Officer Volkov kept up a gentle stream of conversation, asking about her garden, her years in the community. He seemed genuinely kind, helping her from the car when they arrived, and making sure she had her keys. The search teams will be working through the night, he assured her, as they walked to her door. Every available officer is being called in. We'll find answers, Mrs. Spence. Inside, Elizabeth sank into her favorite chair, her mind spinning with the whirlwind of emotions, the questions that remained unanswered, and the hope that one day the truth would finally be revealed. Elizabeth sank into her favorite armchair, the one where she used to sit and watch Dean and Niels play as boys. Officer Volkov checked the windows and the back door, making sure everything was secure. Would you like me to wait until your son arrives? He offered gently. No, you've been very kind. I'll be fine, she said, pausing. Then the question that had been haunting her broke free. Officer Volkov, do you really think Dean could still be alive? A flicker of concern and sympathy crossed his face, but it disappeared too quickly for Elizabeth to fully catch it. If anyone could survive out there, it would be Dean. He knew those woods better than most. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway interrupted them. Elizabeth looked out and saw Niels's pickup truck speeding toward the house, gravel spraying as he braked to a stop. He was out of the vehicle before it had fully come to a halt, rushing toward the house. Mom! Niels burst through the door, wrapping her in a careful hug. At 38, he was the opposite of his older brother in many ways. Where Dean was calculated and methodical, Niels was impulsive and emotional. I'm sorry I couldn't get here sooner. Traffic was a nightmare, and my boss was being a complete... He stopped when he noticed Officer Volkov. Sorry, I'm Niels Spence, Officer Dmitry Volkov. They shook hands. I was just making sure your mother got home safely. Is it true? Rufus really came back? Elizabeth nodded. He's at the vet clinic. Dr. Hernandez will bring him home soon. He's in bad shape, but he's alive. Niels ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his father that Elizabeth's heart clenched. Jesus, 2 years. How is that even possible? That's what we're trying to figure out, Officer Volkov replied. I should get back to the station and help coordinate the search efforts. He turned to Elizabeth. You have my card. Call if you need anything or remember any details that might help. "Thank you for driving me home," Elizabeth said. "You've been very kind." Volkov was just stepping off the porch when another vehicle turned into the driveway, a van emblazoned with Emergency Veterinary Services. Dr. Hernandez was behind the wheel. "Perfect timing," the vet called out as she climbed from the van. "He's starting to wake up. I'll need help getting him inside." Officer Volkov immediately turned back. "I'll help." They opened the van's rear doors to reveal Rufus on a cushioned stretcher. The dog's eyes were open, but still glazed from sedation. His head lifted slightly at the sound of voices. "Easy, boy," Dr. Hernandez soothed. "Let's get you inside." But as soon as Rufus's gaze locked onto Officer Volkov, the transformation was instant. The dog exploded into motion, despite his weakened state and the sedation still in his system. He lunged upward, a deep growl rumbling from his chest. His lips pulled back, showing teeth, and he barked with a ferocity that made everyone step back. "Whoa!" Niels exclaimed, stepping protectively in front of his mother. Rufus continued to bark and snarl, focused entirely on Officer Volkov, who had taken several steps backward, hands raised. "It's okay," Volkov said, though Elizabeth noticed he had gone pale. "I probably smell like my K9 unit. Duke was in my patrol car all morning. Dogs can be territorial about that, but..." Rufus wasn't backing down. Despite Dr. Hernandez's attempts to calm him, the growling continued, his hackles raised, eyes never leaving the officer. "Maybe you should go," Neil suggested, glancing at the officer. "We can handle it from here." Volkov nodded, attempting a laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah, probably best. Duke's a German Shepherd. Very different energy from a wolfhound. Rufus probably thinks I'm bringing competition into his territory." He backed toward his patrol car. "I'll check in tomorrow. Make sure everything's okay." Only after the patrol car pulled away did Rufus begin to calm, though he kept looking toward the road, a low rumble still in his throat. "That was strange," Dr. Hernandez mused. "In my experience, dogs don't usually react that strongly to just a scent, especially not in Rufus's condition." "Well, let's get him inside," she said. "He needs rest, and I want to monitor him for a few more hours. Mrs. Spence, do you still have his bed? Familiar items will help." Elizabeth nodded. "Everything's just as they left it," she said softly. "I couldn't bear to change anything." As they carefully carried Rufus into the house, Elizabeth couldn't shake the image of the dog's reaction to Officer Volkov. In all the years Rufus had been part of their family, she'd never seen him act so aggressively toward anyone. An hour after Dr. Hernandez left, satisfied that Rufus was stable enough to remain in Elizabeth's care, the dog lay on his old bed in the corner of the living room. It was the same spot where he'd always kept watch when Dean and Jocelyn visited. His breathing was steady but labored, his ribs visible with each rise and fall of his chest. Neil sat across from his mother at the kitchen table, 2 cups of coffee growing cold between them. The familiar ritual of sharing coffee felt strange under these circumstances. The same table where they'd gathered for countless family meals, now heavy with unspoken fears. "He loved that dog more than anything," Neil said quietly, watching Rufus sleep. "Remember when he first brought him home? Jocelyn was so mad. You didn't tell me he'd be the size of a small horse," Elizabeth managed a weak smile. "But she fell in love with him just as fast," Niels added. "Used to sneak him treats when she thought Dean wasn't looking." "Dean always knew," Niels continued. "He'd pretend he didn't see." They lapsed into silence. Elizabeth's arthritis was acting up, worse than usual. Stress had made her joints feel like they were full of ground glass. She rubbed her swollen knuckles absently. "Mom," Niels said gently, breaking the silence. "That reaction to the officer earlier, what do you think it means?" Niels started. "I know it was strange. Dean always said Rufus could read people better than anyone else. Remember that time with the contractor who tried to overcharge them for the deck repair? Rufus wouldn't let the guy in the house, and Dean was right not to trust him. Elizabeth nodded, recalling the details. Found out later he'd been scamming elderly homeowners all over the county. The phone rang, startling them both. Elizabeth's heart leapt, every call now carrying the weight of possibility. She answered with trembling fingers. "Mrs. Spence, this is Detective Walsh. I wanted to give you an update on our search efforts." Elizabeth put the phone on speaker so Niels could hear. "We've had teams in the forest since this afternoon," Detective Walsh continued. "We were able to locate what we believe are Rufus's tracks, leading from the deeper woods toward more populated areas. The K9 units followed the trail for several miles." Niels leaned forward. Walsh's voice remained neutral. "The trail is old, Mrs. Spence. Days, maybe weeks. It seems to meander significantly, exactly what you'd expect from an animal foraging, hunting, surviving on its own. We lost it at several stream crossings. But someone bandaged his leg," Elizabeth protested. "Someone helped him." "Yes, that's unusual," Walsh replied. "We're exploring the possibility that a hunter or hiker came across him at some point and provided basic first aid. But honestly, Mrs. Spence, that bandage is crude. It could have been there for quite some time. In this wilderness, it's not uncommon for people to help injured animals they come across without reporting it." "What are you saying?" Niels's voice had an edge to it. Detective Walsh sighed audibly. "Based on what we're seeing, the dog's condition, the meandering trail, the time frame, our working theory is that Rufus has been surviving in the wilderness for the past 2 years. Dogs are remarkably adaptable, especially a breed like an Irish wolfhound. He would have been able to hunt small game, find water sources." "You think my son is dead?" Elizabeth's words were flat, not a question. "Mrs. Spence, I know this isn't what you want to hear, but 2 years in those woods with no confirmed sightings, no evidence of camps or shelters beyond what we found in the initial searches, the most likely scenario is that Dean and Jocelyn encountered some kind of accident, a fall perhaps, or wildlife. The dog survived because he's a dog. They're built for survival in ways humans aren't." "That's not true," Niels snapped. "My brother was DEA. He was trained for survival situations. He knew those woods like the back of his hand." "I understand your frustration," Walsh said softly. "No, you don't," Niels retorted, his voice rising. "You're writing them off based on a few hours of searching and some dog tracks." "Mr. Spence, we're not writing anyone off," Detective Walsh replied calmly. "The search will continue. We'll have teams out there for days, maybe weeks. We'll search every cave, every ravine, every possible shelter. But I wanted to be honest with you about what we're finding so far." Elizabeth closed her eyes, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. "Thank you for the update, Detective. We'll call immediately if anything changes. Try to get some rest." After she hung up, Niels slammed his fist on the table. "They're giving up already, just like 2 years ago. They searched for months back then." Elizabeth's voice softened. "Not good enough. Dean wouldn't just die out there. And even if something happened, there would be evidence. Bodies don't just disappear." She trailed off, the words hard to finish. Niels stood abruptly, frustration boiling over. "Look at Rufus, Mom. He made it back. He found his way home after 2 years. That dog wouldn't leave Dean unless—" He paused, his anger deflating slightly. "Unless he had no choice." They both looked at Rufus, who lay on the bed, still recovering from the ordeal. Even in rest, his face showed signs of what he had endured, a chunk missing from one ear, the raw wound on his head still fresh despite the vet's treatment. "What happened out there, boy?" Elizabeth whispered. "Where's my son?" Rufus's eyes opened slightly at the sound of her voice. His tail gave a single weak thump before he drifted back to sleep. "The bandage means someone helped him," Niels said firmly. "Someone somewhere knows something. The police just need to look harder." "Accidents happen, Niels," Elizabeth said quietly, "even to experienced people. Remember that park ranger last year?" "No, Mom." Niels spun to face her. "Don't compare Dean to some random hiker. He knew those woods better than anyone. He'd been hunting there since he was 12, and he'd never, ever put Jocelyn in danger." "I know that," Elizabeth murmured. "Do you? Because you're sitting there, listening to that detective's theories like they mean something. Like Dean and Jocelyn just fell off a cliff or got eaten by bears with no trace." Elizabeth flinched at the harsh images, the thought of it too painful. "The search teams gave up after 3 months, just like they're giving up now," Niels continued, his frustration building. "They see Rufus and think, 'Oh, the dog survived in the wild for 2 years? The humans must be dead.'" "But what about the bandage, Mom?" Niels asked, his voice tight. "What about the fact that Rufus made it home at all? He wouldn't leave Dean unless something forced him to, or unless Dean told him to," Elizabeth said quietly. Niels stopped in his tracks, looking at her. "You think Dean sent him for help?" Elizabeth hesitated, shoulders sagging with exhaustion. "I don't know what to think anymore. I want to believe they're alive. God knows I do," she continued, her voice trembling. "But 2 years, no ransom demands, no bodies, no camps, no signs. Maybe the police are right. Maybe something terrible happened, and Rufus was the only survivor." Niels's jaw set in a way that reminded Elizabeth painfully of his father. "I'm not accepting that. Not without proof." He strode toward the hallway leading to the garage. Elizabeth heard him rummaging around, metal clanking against metal. "What are you doing?" she called. Niels emerged, carrying his hunting rifle and Dean's old camping pack. "What I should have done better 2 years ago. I'm going back out there." "Niels, it's getting dark." "I've got lights and camping gear." He was already checking the rifle, loading ammunition into his pockets. "I searched for weeks after they disappeared, but maybe I missed something. Maybe things have changed. If Rufus found his way back now, after all this time, something made that happen. The police are searching. The police are going through the motions. They've already decided Dean and Jocelyn are dead." He pulled out a tent, a sleeping bag, and water purification tablets. "I haven't given up. I'll start where they went missing and work outward. Different patterns than last time. If someone helped Rufus, there might be cabins or camps we missed. Niels, please, I can't lose you too." He paused, seeing the fear in her eyes. His expression softened slightly. "You won't. I'll check in by satellite phone every 12 hours, but I have to do this, Mom. I can't just sit here while they write Dean off." Elizabeth knew that determined look. She'd seen it in his father, in Dean, and now in Niels. There would be no talking him out of this. "Be careful," she whispered. "I will." He hugged her briefly, then headed for the door. "Take care of Rufus. Maybe when he's stronger, he'll be able to show us something." The police said the trail went cold. The police followed one trail. Rufus might have taken different routes over 2 years. There could be other signs. Niels shouldered the pack, rifle in hand. "I'll find something, Mom. Whatever happened out there, I'll find the truth." Elizabeth watched from the doorway as Niels loaded his truck, every movement sharp with purpose. She wanted to stop him, to keep her remaining son safe, but she understood his need to act. The not knowing was its own kind of torture. As the truck's taillights disappeared into the gathering darkness, Elizabeth closed the door and returned to Rufus's side. The dog's eyes were open now, watching her with an ancient sadness. "He's going to look for them," she told the dog unnecessarily. "Just like you did, I suppose." Rufus whined softly, his gaze moving to the door as if he too was watching Niels leave. Elizabeth settled into her chair, one hand resting on the dog's head. Whatever secrets those woods held, she prayed they would finally give them up. The house felt too quiet with Niels gone. Elizabeth sat in her armchair beside Rufus's bed. The only sounds were the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the dog's labored breathing. It was past 10 hours now. The window's dark mirrors reflected the warm lamplight of the living room. "Do you remember all those Sunday dinners?" she murmured. "You under the table hoping for scraps. Jocelyn always snuck you pieces of roast when she thought I wasn't looking." Her voice caught. "I miss them so much. I keep wondering, will I ever see my boy again? Will he walk through that door like you did?" She knew she was being silly, talking to a dog about her fears, but who else was there? Niels was out in those dark woods, chasing shadows and hope. Her arthritis was too bad tonight to call her sister in Florida. Holding the phone that long would be agony, so she sat with Rufus, two survivors keeping vigil together. "The police think they're gone," she whispered. "They think you lived wild all this time, that Dean and Jocelyn had an accident, but you wouldn't leave him, would you? Not unless you had to, not unless he told you to go." A sharp knock at the door shattered the quiet. Elizabeth's heart leaped. Niels must have changed his mind, decided to wait until morning after all. She pushed herself up from the chair, joints protesting, and shuffled to the front door. Through the peephole, she was surprised to see Officer Volkov standing on her porch. His uniform was crisp despite the late hour, and he was holding what looked like a manila folder. Elizabeth opened the door partway. "Officer Volkov, it's rather late." "I apologize, Mrs. Spence," he said, and he did look genuinely apologetic. "I know it's after 10, but I've been going through old case files at the station, cross-referencing some of Dean's DEA work with missing persons reports from the last few years. I think I might have found something, a lead possibly. There are some connections I'd like to show you, get your input on. I was going to wait until morning, but I saw your lights were still on, and I thought you'd want to know immediately if there was any new information." "Of course, yes, come in." The moment she opened the door wider, Rufus exploded into a frenzy of barking. Despite his weakened state, he struggled to his feet, lips pulled back in a snarl, his focus laser-sharp on Officer Volkov. "Rufus!" Elizabeth exclaimed, shocked by the intensity of his reaction. "Stop that!" The dog continued to bark and growl, his entire focus on the officer. Volkov had taken several steps backward, hands raised in a non-threatening gesture. "It's okay," Volkov said, though Elizabeth noticed he had gone pale. "I probably smell like my K9 unit. Duke was in my patrol car all morning. Dogs can be territorial about that, but Rufus wasn't backing down. Despite Dr. Hernandez's attempts to calm him earlier, the growling continued, the dog's hackles raised and eyes never leaving Volkov. "Maybe you should go," Niels suggested, stepping in front of his mother. "We can handle it from here." Volkov nodded, his attempt at a smile falling short. "Yeah, probably best. Duke's a German shepherd, very different energy from a wolfhound. Rufus probably thinks I'm bringing competition into his territory." He backed toward his patrol car. "I'll check in tomorrow, make sure everything's okay." Only after the patrol car pulled away did Rufus begin to calm, though he kept looking toward the road, a low rumble still in his throat. Elizabeth sighed, shaking her head at the oddity of it all. "That was strange," Dr. Hernandez mused as she looked at Rufus. "In my experience, dogs don't usually react that strongly to just a scent, especially not in Rufus's condition." "Well, let's get him inside," Elizabeth said, trying to steer the conversation back to the dog's care. "He needs rest, and I want to monitor him for a few more hours. Mrs. Spence, do you still have his bed? Familiar items will help." Elizabeth nodded. "Everything's just as they left it." She paused. "I couldn't bear to change anything." As they carefully carried Rufus inside, Elizabeth couldn't shake the image of his reaction to Officer Volkov. In all the years Rufus had been part of their family, she'd never seen him act so aggressively toward anyone. "Maybe the dog knows more than we think," Elizabeth whispered to herself as she settled back into her chair, the weight of the night settling in. Rufus continued his aggressive display, actually trying to lunge forward despite his injuries. His barking was so loud it hurt Elizabeth's ears. "I'm so sorry," she said to Volkov, who had taken a step back from the doorway. "I don't know what's gotten into him. Ever since he came back, he's been acting so strange." "It's all right," Volkov said, though Elizabeth noticed he kept his hand near his service weapon. "Trauma can change an animal's behavior significantly. Let me put him in his crate. Just give me a moment." It took considerable effort to get Rufus into the large wire crate they kept in the corner of the living room. He fought her the whole way, something he had never done before, and continued barking even after she latched the door. "Hush now," she said firmly. "That's enough. Officer Volkov is trying to help us." She returned to the front door, embarrassed and flustered. "I'm so sorry about that. Please come in. Would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." "That would be wonderful. Thank you," Volkov replied as he stepped inside, his eyes immediately scanning the living room. It must be difficult being here alone with everything that's happened. Niels was here earlier, but he's gone to search the woods himself. "Couldn't wait for morning." Elizabeth led the way toward the kitchen, noting that Rufus's barking had shifted to a low, continuous growl. "He's convinced the police aren't doing enough," Volkov said, following her. "Family often feels that way. It's natural to want to take action, to feel like you're doing something." "Yes, I suppose so." Elizabeth turned to ask him to have a seat at the kitchen table when she felt something soft press against her face. The sharp chemical smell hit her nostrils a split second before she understood what was happening. A cloth over her mouth and nose, chloroform, her mind supplied uselessly as she tried to struggle. But Volkov was stronger, younger, and had the element of surprise. One arm wrapped around her waist, holding her against him, while the other kept the cloth firmly in place. Elizabeth's arthritic hands clawed weakly at his arm, but already the edges of her vision were darkening. "I'm sorry about this," she heard him say, his voice sounding very far away. "But your son made this necessary." Her legs gave out, and the kitchen tilted sideways as darkness crept in. Through the growing haze, she could hear Rufus going absolutely wild in his crate, barking, snarling, and throwing himself against the wire walls. "He tried to warn me," she thought, muzzily. He knew. He tried to tell me. The last thing she heard before the darkness claimed her completely was Rufus's desperate barking and the sound of her body hitting the kitchen floor. Consciousness returned slowly, bringing with it a pounding headache and the taste of chemicals in her mouth. Elizabeth's eyes fluttered open to harsh, fluorescent lighting and concrete. She was sitting on a cold floor, her back against something hard. When she tried to move, she realized her hands were bound behind her. "Ah, you're awake." Officer Volkov stood a few feet away, no longer the helpful, concerned officer from before. His uniform was gone, replaced by dark civilian clothes. The friendly mask had dropped entirely, revealing cold calculation in those blue eyes. "Why?" Elizabeth's voice came out as a croak. "Why are you doing this?" "Because your son couldn't leave well enough alone," Volkov replied matter-of-factly. "He had to play hero, had to send that damn dog for help." Elizabeth's mind struggled to process this. "You mean Dean is alive?" "For now," Volkov said, pulling out his phone and typing something quickly. Though that may change depending on how cooperative everyone decides to be. Two men entered through a metal door Elizabeth hadn't noticed. They were large, rough-looking, with the kind of faces that had seen violence and hadn't minded it. They spoke rapidly to Volkov in what Elizabeth recognized as Russian, though she couldn't understand the words. Their tone was angry and aggressive. Volkov responded in the same language, gesturing toward Elizabeth. One of the men spat on the floor and said something that sounded like a curse. "Get her up," Volkov said in English. "Time for a family reunion." The two men hauled Elizabeth to her feet, ignoring her gasp of pain as her arthritic joints protested. Her shoulders screamed as they half-dragged her through the warehouse. She tried to take in details: metal shelving, shipping containers, the smell of motor oil and rust. They were somewhere industrial, but she had no idea where. They passed through another door into a connected warehouse space. This one was darker, with only a few overhead bulbs providing dim illumination. Volkov led them to what looked like a storage room that had been walled off with plywood, creating a crude cell. He produced a key and unlocked a padlock on the door. "Your son has been our guest for quite some time, Mrs. Spence," Volkov said. "I'm sure he'll be thrilled to see you." The door swung open, and Elizabeth's heart dropped. Niels's jaw set in a way that reminded Elizabeth painfully of his father. "I'm not accepting that. Not without proof." He strode toward the hallway leading to the garage. Elizabeth heard him rummaging around, metal clanking against metal. "What are you doing?" she called. Niels emerged, carrying his hunting rifle and Dean's old camping pack. "What I should have done better 2 years ago. I'm going back out there. Niels, it's getting dark. I've got lights and camping gear." He was already checking the rifle, loading ammunition into his pockets. "I searched for weeks after they disappeared, but maybe I missed something. Maybe things have changed. If Rufus found his way back now, after all this time, something made that happen. The police are searching. The police are going through the motions. They've already decided Dean and Jocelyn are dead." He pulled out a tent, a sleeping bag, and water purification tablets. "I haven't given up. I'll start where they went missing and work outward. Different patterns than last time. If someone helped Rufus, there might be cabins or camps we missed." "Niels, please, I can't lose you too." He paused, seeing the fear in her eyes. His expression softened slightly. "You won't. I'll check in by satellite phone every 12 hours, but I have to do this, Mom. I can't just sit here while they write Dean off." Elizabeth knew that determined look. She'd seen it in his father, in Dean, and now in Niels. There would be no talking him out of this. "Be careful," she whispered. "I will." He hugged her briefly, then headed for the door. "Take care of Rufus. Maybe when he's stronger, he'll be able to show us something." The police said the trail went cold. The police followed one trail. Rufus might have taken different routes over 2 years. There could be other signs. Niels shouldered the pack, rifle in hand. "I'll find something, Mom. Whatever happened out there, I'll find the truth." Elizabeth watched from the doorway as Niels loaded his truck, every movement sharp with purpose. She wanted to stop him, to keep her remaining son safe, but she understood his need to act. The not knowing was its own kind of torture. As the truck's taillights disappeared into the gathering darkness, Elizabeth closed the door and returned to Rufus's side. The dog's eyes were open now, watching her with an ancient sadness. "He's going to look for them," she told the dog unnecessarily. "Just like you did, I suppose." Rufus whined softly, his gaze moving to the door, as if he too was watching Niels leave. Elizabeth settled into her chair, one hand resting on the dog's head. Whatever secrets those woods held, she prayed they would finally give them up. The house felt too quiet with Niels gone. Elizabeth sat in her armchair beside Rufus's bed. The only sounds were the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the dog's labored breathing. It was past 10:05 now. The window's dark mirrors reflected the warm lamplight of the living room. "Do you remember all those Sunday dinners?" she murmured. "You under the table, hoping for scraps. Jocelyn always snuck you pieces of roast when she thought I wasn't looking." Her voice caught. "I miss them so much. I keep wondering, will I ever see my boy again? Will he walk through that door like you did?" She knew she was being silly, talking to a dog about her fears, but who else was there? Niels was out in those dark woods, chasing shadows and hope. Her arthritis was too bad tonight to call her sister in Florida. Holding the phone that long would be agony, so she sat with Rufus, 2 survivors keeping vigil together. "The police think they're gone," she whispered. "They think you lived wild all this time, that Dean and Jocelyn had an accident. But you wouldn't leave him, would you? Not unless you had to. Not unless he told you to go." A sharp knock at the door shattered the quiet. Elizabeth's heart leaped. Niels must have changed his mind. Decided to wait until morning, after all. She pushed herself up from the chair, joints protesting, and shuffled to the front door. Through the peephole, she was surprised to see Officer Volkov standing on her porch. His uniform was crisp despite the late hour, and he was holding what looked like a manila folder. Elizabeth opened the door partway. "Officer Volkov, it's rather late." "I apologize, Mrs. Spence," he said, and he did look genuinely apologetic. "I know it's after 10, but I've been going through old case files at the station, cross-referencing some of Dean's DEA work with missing persons reports from the last few years. I think I might have found something. A lead, possibly. There are some connections I'd like to show you, get your input on. I was going to wait until morning, but I saw your lights were still on, and I thought you'd want to know immediately if there was any new information." "Of course, yes, come in." The moment she opened the door wider, Rufus exploded into a frenzy of barking. Despite his weakened state, he struggled to his feet, lips pulled back in a snarl, his focus laser-sharp on Officer Volkov. "Rufus!" Elizabeth exclaimed, shocked by the intensity of his reaction. "Stop that!" The dog continued to bark and growl, his entire focus on the officer. Volkov had taken several steps backward, hands raised in a non-threatening gesture. "It's okay," Volkov said, though Elizabeth noticed he had gone pale. "I probably smell like my K9 unit. Duke was in my patrol car all morning. Dogs can be territorial about that, but..." Rufus wasn't backing down, despite Dr. Hernandez's attempts to calm him earlier. The growling continued, the dog's hackles raised and eyes never leaving Volkov. "Maybe you should go," Niels suggested, stepping in front of his mother. "We can handle it from here." Volkov nodded, his attempt at a smile falling short. "Yeah, probably best. Duke's a German Shepherd, very different energy from a wolfhound. Rufus probably thinks I'm bringing competition into his territory." He backed toward his patrol car. "I'll check in tomorrow. Make sure everything's okay." Only after the patrol car pulled away did Rufus begin to calm, though he kept looking toward the road, a low rumble still in his throat. Elizabeth sighed, shaking her head at the oddity of it all. "That was strange," Dr. Hernandez mused as she looked at Rufus. "In my experience, dogs don't usually react that strongly to just a scent, especially not in Rufus's condition." "Well, let's get him inside," Elizabeth said, trying to steer the conversation back to the dog's care. "He needs rest, and I want to monitor him for a few more hours. Mrs. Spence, do you still have his bed? Familiar items will help." Elizabeth nodded. "Everything's just as they left it." She paused. "I couldn't bear to change anything." As they carefully carried Rufus inside, Elizabeth couldn't shake the image of his reaction to Officer Volkov. In all the years Rufus had been part of their family, she'd never seen him act so aggressively toward anyone. "Maybe the dog knows more than we think," Elizabeth whispered to herself as she settled back into her chair, the weight of the night settling in. Through the doorway, just as Dr. Kumar began speaking, his face lined with concern. "Mrs. Spence, we're doing everything we can, but your son's condition is critical. His vitals are stabilizing, but he's extremely malnourished, and the physical trauma he's endured. It's going to take time for him to recover." Elizabeth's hand tightened on the cold glass of the ICU window as she stared at Dean. Her son, once strong and vibrant, was now reduced to a shell of the man he had been. His skeletal frame, the sharpness of his bones under the thin hospital sheets, a painful reminder of the 2 years he had spent in captivity. She couldn't help but feel the weight of those years pressing down on her chest, the nightmares he had endured now etched into his body. Niels stood beside her, his face a mask of disbelief and quiet rage. "I don't understand, Mom. How could this happen? How did they do this to him?" "I don't know," Elizabeth whispered, her voice barely audible. "But we have him back, Niels. We have him back. Niels looked down at his feet, trying to steady himself. His hands trembled slightly as he ran them through his hair. "This is my fault," he murmured. "If I hadn't gone out there, if I had just waited." "Niels, no," Elizabeth cut him off softly. "You did what you had to. We both did." The sound of footsteps interrupted them as Dr. Kumar stepped forward, his expression sympathetic but professional. "Mrs. Spence, I know this is overwhelming, but I need you to understand that your son's recovery is going to be a long process. Physically, he's been through more than most people could endure, but mentally," he hesitated, looking at Dean, who was unconscious, his breathing shallow. "It's going to take time. He may not be the same person he was before." Elizabeth nodded, tears welling up in her eyes again. She couldn't process everything all at once. She had barely begun to understand the horrors her son had lived through, and now she was faced with the reality that recovery would be just as brutal as the past 2 years had been. "I want to be here when he wakes up," Elizabeth said firmly, turning her gaze back to Dean. "He needs to know I'm here." Dr. Kumar gave her a small nod. "Of course, I'll keep you updated on his condition. For now, we'll monitor him closely." "But he's a fighter, Mrs. Spence. He has a chance to recover." As the doctor walked away, Niels leaned in closer to Elizabeth. "He's strong, Mom. He'll make it. He has to." Elizabeth wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that Dean could overcome everything: his captivity, the loss of Jocelyn, the torment he had endured. But looking at him, so fragile and broken, she wasn't sure anymore. She didn't know how to help him find the strength he needed. "I'll be right here with him, Niels. We both will." Niels nodded, his face still haunted. "We'll get through this. Together." As the hours passed and the night stretched on, Elizabeth remained by Dean's side, her hand resting gently on his. She thought about everything that had happened, the horrors they had all faced, and wondered if their family would ever truly be whole again. The nightmares were over, but the journey to healing had just begun. Niels had his arm around his mother's shoulders. They had both been checked and released. Elizabeth's injuries were minor, though her arthritis flared terribly from the stress and abuse. "He's severely malnourished," Dr. Kumar said as he consulted his tablet. "His body weight is approximately 60% of what it should be. We're seeing signs of refeeding syndrome, so we have to be very careful with nutrition. Severe dehydration has damaged his kidneys. We're monitoring that closely." "Will he—" Elizabeth couldn't finish. "Yes," Dr. Kumar answered, but his voice was heavy. "But we're seeing infected wounds, particularly on his wrists and ankles from the chains. Muscle atrophy is severe. Even if he recovers, he'll need months of physical therapy to walk properly again." Elizabeth's joints screamed as she shifted position, but she ignored them. Her pain was nothing compared to what Dean had endured. "There are some people here who need to speak with him," Dr. Kumar added reluctantly. "FBI. They say it's urgent." Through the glass, Elizabeth watched 2 agents in dark suits enter Dean's room. They were gentle, professional, but she could see the urgency in their movements. Whatever Dean knew, it was important. She and Niels were allowed in to support him during the interview. Dean's voice was barely a whisper, and he had to rest frequently, but his mind was sharp. The details he revealed made Elizabeth's blood run cold. "The warehouse was a hub," Dean rasped, his voice weak but steady. "Smuggling operation, drugs, weapons, people, sometimes a route from Canada using back roads, private property. They had border patrol on payroll." "How many officers were involved?" Agent Martinez asked, recording everything. "Maybe 12 different ones, over 2 years. Volkov was the main contact, but there were more. They talked about others." Dean closed his eyes, concentrating. "Badge numbers. I memorized badge numbers when I could see them." He recited a series of numbers. Agent Martinez's partner was already on the phone relaying the information. "The operation?" Martinez prompted gently. "Cartel money. Dean continued. Mexican cartel partnered with Russian mob, millions invested. They needed DEA intel, patrol schedules, planned raids, which routes we were watching. Dean's skeletal hand clenched. I held out for 3 months, then they brought Jocelyn to my cell. Said they'd hurt her if I didn't cooperate. Elizabeth squeezed his other hand, feeling the bones through papery skin. I gave them outdated intel at first, stuff that wouldn't matter, but they figured it out. Tears leaked from Dean's sunken eyes. 14 months in, Jocelyn fought back, grabbed a gun from one of them during feeding, almost made it to the door. His voice broke. Niels made a sound of pure rage. They shot her in front of me, said it was my fault. Said if I just cooperated? Dean couldn't continue for a moment. After that, they used Rufus every time I hesitated, every time I tried to give them false information. They'd hurt him. Burns, cuts, beatings. That wound on his head? That was from 2 weeks ago when I tried to refuse again. But you got him out, Agent Martinez said. Took me months to work it free. Opening was too small for me, but Rufus could squeeze through. I knew he'd find his way home. He knows every trail between here and Mom's house. How did you convince them to bring the dog to you? Told them I was dying, that I'd give them everything. Safe house locations, undercover agent identities, but only if I could say goodbye to my dog. First, they believed me because I looked dead already, a ghost of a smile. Volkov always underestimated how smart Rufus is. The interview continued for another 20 minutes, with Dean providing every detail he could remember. License plates, voices, names mentioned in passing. The FBI agents looked grimmer with each revelation. This wasn't just a kidnapping. It was a massive corruption case that reached into multiple law enforcement agencies. Finally, Dr. Kumar intervened. He needs to rest. As the agents left, one turned back. Mr. Spence, we've already arrested 8 officers based on the raid. Your information will help us get the rest. You've saved a lot of lives. Dean closed his eyes. Couldn't save the one that mattered most. A knock at the door interrupted the heavy silence. Dr. Hernandez, the veterinarian, stood there with a familiar figure. I got special permission, she said softly. Someone wanted to see his dad. Rufus limped into the room, his tail wagging despite his injuries. The dog, who'd been too weak to stand properly just hours ago, had found new strength. He approached the bed carefully, as if understanding how fragile Dean was. "Hey, boy," Dean whispered. His skeletal hand reached out. Rufus gently rested his head on the bed, positioning himself so Dean could touch him without straining. The dog's eyes never left his master's face. "Good boy," Dean breathed. "Such a good boy. You did it. You got help." Both man and dog were crying, Dean's tears silent, Rufus's coming out as soft whines. The dog carefully placed one paw on the bed, maintaining contact. Agent Martinez appeared in the doorway one more time. "Mrs. Spence, I thought you should know. We've found remains at the warehouse. 3 bodies so far. Your son was right about the murders, and we expect more arrests within the hour." Elizabeth nodded, unable to speak. Justice was coming, but it couldn't bring back Jocelyn or undo 2 years of torture. As the room cleared, leaving just family, Niels moved closer to his brother's bed. "Dad would be proud," he said quietly. "You never gave up. You survived, and you got Rufus home." Dean's eyes found his brother. "I gave them information. People might have died because of what I told them." "You were tortured for 2 years," Niels said firmly. "You watched your wife murdered. You did what you had to do to survive. No one could blame you for that." Elizabeth thought of Jocelyn, vibrant, laughing Jocelyn who loved hiking, bad action movies, and who looked at Dean like he hung the moon, gone because of greed and corruption. The tears came again, silent and painful. "I memorized everything," Dean whispered, his energy fading, every face, every name, every detail for her. They're going to pay for what they did to her. Rest now, Elizabeth said, stroking his forehead around the IVs and monitors. Just rest. Dr. Kumar returned. He needs to sleep. You can stay, but please let him rest. The family settled in for their vigil, Niels in an uncomfortable chair, Elizabeth in a recliner a nurse had brought for her arthritic joints, Rufus curled on a blanket on the floor, positioned where he could see Dean, refusing to leave his post. The room was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors and Dean's breathing. Elizabeth settled back, prepared for the long vigil ahead. Her son was home, damaged, grieving, but home. They would face whatever came next together. The recovery, the trials, the long journey back from hell. For now, it was enough to sit in this sterile room and watch her son breathe. Each rise and fall of his chest was a small victory, a defiance of those who'd tried to break him. He'd survived. They'd survived.